Story 1. The paperwork was wrong. It was raining the night the folder arrived. A plain manila envelope, unmarked except for a faint blue stamp on the corner that read, Evergreen Family Services. Emma almost threw it out with the rest of the junk mail, but something about it, its weight maybe, made her pause. Inside were typed documents, an agency letterhead, and a single photo. A boy, maybe 6 years old. Brown hair, pale skin, and the kind of soft, uncertain smile that made Emma's heart tighten. His name's Lucas, she told her husband, Peter, when he came home from work. He's perfect. Peter frowned, setting down his wet coat. I thought we agreed. No more agencies. We can't afford another scam. I know, she said, clutching the papers like they might vanish. But this one feels different. They didn't ask for money. Just a meeting. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning, in a small office space downtown. Except when they arrived, there was nothing there. No sign, no front desk, no trace that Evergreen Family Services had ever existed. Just an empty floor and a lingering smell of disinfectant. Emma stood frozen in the hallway, heart hammering. Peter, Barb, what is this? Before he could answer, a woman stepped out of the shadows near the elevator. She was tall, pale, and wearing a long gray coat. You must be the Lanes, she said, smiling faintly. I apologize for the inconvenience. We prefer to keep our process discreet. Something about her voice was calm yet hollow, as if the words were spoken from a long distance. Within the week, Lucas arrived. He didn't say much that first day, just stood by the window with his small suitcase, staring out at the rain like he'd been waiting for it. Emma tried to make him comfortable. Warm blankets, hot chocolate, his own room decorated with stars. But he only nodded politely, murmuring, "Thank you," in a voice too quiet for his age. That night, when Emma tucked him in, he asked, "Do I get to stay this time?" Her heart broke a little. "Of course, sweetheart. You're home now." But Lucas didn't smile. He just turned his face toward the wall and whispered, "That's what they all said." The first few weeks were uneventful. Lucas was quiet but well-behaved, always drawing pictures in crayon, circles, trees, houses. But one detail always repeated. In every drawing, the same dark figure stood behind the house, a shape with no face. Peter brushed it off. Kids draw weird things. He's probably just processing. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Lucas's gaze sometimes followed her a little too long, or that the hallway light flickered when he passed beneath it. One evening, while folding laundry, Emma found a piece of paper in Lucas's jeans pocket. It was a page from a hospital discharge form. Her heart froze at the date. July 14th, 2019. Lucas's adoption papers had been dated 2021, 2 years apart. 2 years too late. Emma drove to the address listed on the form the next day, a small-town hospital 2 hours away. The receptionist was kind but confused when Emma asked about the name. Lucas Grant? Emma said, holding up the paper. I think he was a patient here. The receptionist typed the name, frowned, and turned pale. Ma'am, there's a record, but she hesitated. It says he was pronounced dead. July 14th, 2019. Emma's stomach dropped. That's not possible. He's my son. He's alive. The woman only shook her head. That child died of hypothermia, found alone in a car on the edge of town. Emma left before the police could be called. The papers in her lap trembled as she drove home. When she pulled into the driveway, Lucas was sitting on the porch steps, still in his pajamas, smiling faintly. You went to see them, didn't you? He said softly. Emma froze. See who? The ones who used to call me theirs. That night, she tried to tell Peter. He didn't believe her. Emma, he's a kid. Maybe there was a mix-up with the name. You're just... I'm not imagining this, she snapped. He knows things he shouldn't. He said my mother's name, Peter. I've never told him that. And he... She stopped. The living room lights flickered. From upstairs, they heard Lucas humming, a slow, tuneless melody that made Emma's skin crawl. When they crept up to his door, They found him sitting on the floor facing the window. His drawings were scattered around him, each one now darker, the crayon pressed so hard it tore the paper. Every picture showed the same house. Their house. But this time, the figure wasn't outside. It was inside, standing in the doorway of Lucas's room. The next morning, Peter called the police. But when officers arrived, the agency number was disconnected, the website gone, the woman in the gray coat untraceable. Could be a black market adoption ring, one officer suggested. We'll investigate. But Emma knew this wasn't that simple. That night, she found Lucas standing by the front door, holding one of Peter's jackets. "Where are you going?" she asked. He looked up at her, calm. "You should tell him to stop leaving the basement light on." Emma froze. "There's no light in the basement," Lucas smiled. "There wasn't before." At midnight, she heard the sound. Soft footsteps, the creak of the basement door, and a flicker of light beneath the crack. Peter was asleep beside her, but she couldn't stay still. She grabbed the flashlight and crept downstairs. The door was ajar. When she opened it, the air hit her, cold, damp, like the air inside a freezer. At the bottom of the steps, the single bulb was swinging gently, casting dizzying shadows. And there, standing in the center of the room, was the woman in the gray coat. Her eyes were wrong, too bright, too hollow. "You shouldn't have checked the records," she said softly. "He was meant to stay forgotten." Emma's breath caught. "What is he?" The woman tilted her head. "A return. A correction. You called for a child, and something answered." Emma took a step back. "He's not yours anymore." The woman smiled. "He was never mine. He just followed." The basement light flickered again, and when Emma looked back, the woman was gone. Lucas grew colder after that. He rarely spoke, rarely ate. Sometimes Emma would find him standing at the top of the stairs, watching the front door as if waiting for someone. Then, one morning, Peter didn't wake up. His body was ice cold, his eyes open, a faint smile on his lips. The coroner couldn't explain it. "Looks like hypothermia," he said, "but there's no reason for it." When the police asked questions, Lucas just sat on the couch humming that same broken tune. "Are you sad about Daddy?" Emma asked, tears streaming down her face. He looked up, confused. "He said he was tired. He said it was time to go home." "Home?" she whispered. "This is home." Lucas only shook his head. "No, my first home, the one in the dark." Weeks passed. Emma barely slept. The cold in the house grew worse. The walls seemed to breathe at night, and sometimes she'd wake up to find frost on the inside of her windows. One evening, she found Lucas's old drawings hidden beneath his bed. But they'd changed again. Now, each one showed a woman, her, lying in bed, eyes closed, blue around the lips. And above her, the figure from before, holding her hand. The last page was just words in a child's uneven scrawl. "She will come for you too." That night, Emma packed a bag. She drove to the police station and begged them to take Lucas back. But when she turned around, he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The officer who reviewed her statement frowned. "Ma'am, you said you adopted him from Evergreen Family Services?" "Yes," she said, shaking. "They sent us everything. Papers, signatures." He sighed and slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs of a burned-out office building. The sign out front read, "Evergreen Family Services." "It burned down in 2019, he said. "Everyone inside died in the fire, including a boy." His name was Lucas Grant. Emma stared at the photo. The charred walls. The faint outline of a child's shoe. When she finally made it home that night, the house was cold and silent. Lucas's room was empty. His drawings were gone. But on the kitchen table sat one last photo, one she had never seen before. It showed her, Peter, and Lucas, all smiling. Except Emma's face looked pale and lifeless. And behind them, the woman in gray stood in the doorway, her hand resting on Emma's shoulder. Story 2. The Other Daughter. The day they brought Lily home, the world finally felt right again. After years of paperwork, home visits, and hollow promises from agencies, Sarah and Daniel Harper had given up on ever having a child. Then came the call. A private adoption. Expedited, nearly miraculous. A little girl, 6 years old, quiet but healthy, ready for a home. When Sarah first saw her at the agency office, she cried. Lily was small, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her face. She held a tattered stuffed rabbit so tightly that its fur had worn down to cloth. "She's been through a lot," the social worker said softly, "but she's very special." Special. The word lingered in Sarah's mind as they drove home that day. Lily barely spoke, staring out the window as if watching something only she could see. When they arrived, Sarah knelt by her side. "This is home now, sweetheart," she said. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Lily blinked once, slowly. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. "She can't hurt me now." At first, things were perfect. Sarah filled Lily's room with toys and soft pink curtains. She cooked her favorite meals, mac and cheese, chicken nuggets, things children were supposed to love. Daniel taught her how to ride a bike in the driveway. But as the days passed, Sarah began noticing small things. Tiny, harmless things at first. Like the extra set of footprints in the hallway carpet. Or the faint giggle echoing from Lily's room after lights out. Once, she even saw a small shadow dart across the landing. "Just the house settling," Daniel said when she mentioned it. "Or maybe she's playing with imaginary friends." Perfectly normal. Sarah wanted to believe that. She really did. But then came the whispering. It started one night, faint at first, like the sound of someone talking through a wall. Sarah thought Lily had left her nightlight on, maybe watching cartoons in bed. But when she opened the door, the room was dark. Lily was sitting up, eyes open, staring at the empty corner. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. Lily didn't look away. "She said you shouldn't come in." Sarah froze. "Who said that?" "The other me." The next morning, Lily was cheerful, humming as she ate breakfast, as if the night before hadn't happened. Sarah tried to laugh it off. Kids had imaginary friends all the time, didn't they? But the unease grew. When Sarah went to do laundry that afternoon, she found one of Lily's dresses, torn down the front, muddy, almost burned at the edges. She called Daniel over, but when he looked at it, the fabric was clean again, but smooth as new. "Sarah," he said gently, "you've been anxious. Maybe you should rest a little." She nodded, but something in her gut screamed that this wasn't exhaustion. Something was wrong with the child they had brought home. 3 nights later, Sarah woke to the sound of laughter. A child's laughter. It wasn't Lily's. It was colder. Higher. She got out of bed and followed the sound down the hallway. The air grew colder with each step. When she reached Lily's door, she hesitated. The laughter stopped. "Lily," she whispered. She opened the door. Lily was asleep in bed. But sitting beside her, facing the wall, was another little girl. Same hair, same nightgown. But her skin was ashen, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Sarah gasped. The figure turned slowly, revealing empty white eyes and a smile too wide for her small face. Then, just as suddenly, she was gone. Sarah rushed to Lily's bed, shaking her awake. "Honey, wake up!" There was someone. Lily blinked drowsily. "It's okay, Mommy. She just wanted to see you." By morning, Sarah's hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold her coffee cup. Daniel tried to reassure her again, but she could tell he didn't believe a word of what she'd seen. "She's adapting," he said. "You're stressed." These things. But he stopped when Lily walked in. She looked directly at him and said, "She's telling the truth." Daniel frowned. "Who told you that?" "The other me." Sarah started digging through Lily's adoption papers that afternoon. Something had been bothering her ever since they brought her home. The agency name, Haven Oaks, had no physical address. The phone number now returned a disconnected tone, so she called the state office. The woman who answered sounded confused. I'm sorry, ma'am, but Haven Oaks hasn't operated since 2016. There was an incident. What kind of incident? Fire, the woman said quietly. The building burned down. Several children died. Sarah's heart stopped. Lily? She whispered. The woman hesitated. There was a girl by that name, yes? But she didn't survive. Sarah dropped the phone. That night, she locked the doors, double-checked every window. Daniel thought she was losing her mind. But Sarah knew what she'd seen. She'd seen her. Around midnight, a noise woke her again. The soft creak of Lily's door opening. Sarah got out of bed, clutching her flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. Lily stood at the end of it, facing away, holding hands with someone shorter, smaller. Lily, Sarah whispered. Come here, sweetheart. The second figure turned its head slightly. Its face was pale, burned along the jawline, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Lily's voice was small and sad. She wants to come back. Who is she? My first me, Lily whispered. Before you found me. Sarah called the police the next morning, desperate for help. But when they arrived, the house was calm, bright, perfectly normal. Lily sat on the couch drawing pictures. When the officers asked what was wrong, Sarah handed them one of the drawings. It showed two identical girls standing side by side. One colored pink, smiling, holding Sarah's hand. The other gray, burned, frowning. And above them, written in a child's uneven handwriting, only one can stay. Daniel took Lily to her room that evening, gently but firmly. No more of this nonsense, he said. You're confusing Mommy. She looked at him with tearful eyes. She said you'd say that. Who? The one in the mirror. He sighed, exasperated, and turned toward the vanity mirror in her room. Enough? His words caught. For a moment, his reflection didn't move with him. It smiled, slowly, deliberately, while Daniel stood frozen. Then it stepped closer to the glass. The bulb flickered, and the mirror cracked down the center. Sarah found him hours later in the hallway, trembling, muttering. His reflection had been gone since. When he stood before a mirror, there was only her reflection, and Lily's, but never his. That night, Sarah decided to end it. She packed Lily's bag, drove through the storm, and returned to the burned site of the Haven Oaks facility. The building was nothing but blackened ruins and ash, but Sarah walked through the rubble anyway, calling out. Please, take her back, she screamed. Whatever this is, whatever happened, please, just stop. The wind howled through the broken walls. And then, laughter. The same cold laughter from the house. From the shadows stepped a small figure, her skin blistered, her nightgown burned, her rabbit clutched to her chest. You already took her, the girl said softly. But I never left. Sarah backed away. What do you want from us? The ghost tilted her head. You wanted a daughter. You got one. You just forgot she was me. When Sarah returned home, she was shaking. She carried Lily upstairs, tucked her into bed and whispered, We'll fix this, sweetheart. I promise. Lily smiled faintly. You can't fix what's already broken. The next morning, Sarah woke to silence. Daniel was gone. His side of the bed cold. In the kitchen, a new drawing lay on the table. It showed three figures, Sarah, Lily, and a man lying on the floor with no face. And above them, the same words, only one can stay. Sarah began losing track of days. The house no longer felt like theirs. Every photo of the family slowly changed. Lily's smile stretched wider, while Sarah's face looked paler, more drained. Sometimes, in the corners of mirrors, Sarah thought she saw another child, watching, waiting. One night she finally asked, Why are you doing this? She whispered to the dark. Lily's voice floated from her bed. She wants me back. She says you stole me from her. But you're mine now, Sarah said, tears falling. You're my daughter. No, Lily whispered. I was hers first. The air grew colder, the lights flickered, and then the second voice came, smaller, broken. whispering from the corner. "Give her back." Sarah turned. The burned girl stood there again, clutching her rabbit. But this time, her eyes were full of sorrow. "You took what wasn't yours," the ghost said softly. "Now you'll know how it feels." The room exploded in a rush of wind and cold. The walls bled into shadow. The house flickered like static. Sarah screamed, clutching Lily. But when she looked down, she wasn't holding Lily anymore. She was holding the burned girl. Lily stood across the room, smiling. "Goodbye, Mommy," she said. And then everything went dark. When the neighbors found the house days later, it was empty. No sign of the Harpers. Just a single Polaroid sitting on the mantelpiece. It showed Sarah, Daniel, and Lily, smiling in front of the house. But a second girl stood behind them, face half burned, holding Sarah's hand. And in the corner, scrawled in a child's handwriting, "Only one can stay." Story 3, Adoption Day. It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. After 3 years of waiting, interviews, background checks, and countless home visits, Julia and Thomas Hayes were finally about to make it official: the adoption of their son, Ethan. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, striping the floor with golden bars as the judge smiled down from her bench. Ethan sat between them, swinging his legs, his small hand clutching Julia's. He was 6 years old, quiet, polite, with hair a little too long and eyes that seemed to see everything. When the judge read the final approval, Julia cried. Thomas put an arm around her, and even Ethan smiled, though only faintly. Cameras flashed. The agency representative, a pale woman named Mrs. Cole, shook their hands and congratulated them. And just like that, it was official. Ethan Hayes was their son. That night they threw a small celebration. Their friends came over, bringing gifts and balloons. Ethan sat on the couch surrounded by presents, opening each one carefully, whispering "thank you" after every gift. Julia noticed he never ripped the wrapping paper. He folded it neatly before setting it aside. It was such a small thing, but it made her chest ache. He'd grown up with nothing, she thought. He treasured every scrap. Later, after everyone left, she tucked him into bed. "You're home for good now, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing his hair back. "You never have to go anywhere again." He looked up at her with those dark, solemn eyes. "I know," he said. "They can't find me now." She froze. "Who can't find you, honey?" Ethan blinked slowly as though realizing he'd said too much. "The people from before," he murmured, turning over. "Good night, Mommy." Julia stood in the doorway for a long time after that, listening to his breathing even out. The next morning, a letter arrived. It bore the official seal of the Haverbrook Children's Home, the orphanage Ethan had come from. Thomas opened it while sipping his coffee, his brow furrowed. "Julia, this says they want us to confirm Ethan's placement?" She frowned. "Confirm? But the adoption's finalized. We just left the courthouse yesterday." He turned the page over. "They say there's been a clerical issue. They're requesting a video call immediately." They both laughed nervously at first. Bureaucracy, they figured, paperwork mix-up. But when they logged on to the video call that afternoon, the woman on the other end wasn't Mrs. Cole. She introduced herself as Director Hanlon, and she looked confused from the moment the call began. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she said carefully, "I'm not sure how to tell you this, but our records show that no child named Ethan was ever released for adoption." Julia blinked. "What are you talking about?" "We met him through your agency. We've been in contact with your staff for months." "I understand, but..." Director Hanlon's expression darkened. "Haverbrook closed down last year. It's been defunct since March. You couldn't have gone through us." Thomas exchanged a bewildered look with his wife. "That's impossible." "We met with Mrs. Cole in person. We have emails, documents, everything." The director shook her head. "Mrs. Cole?" she repeated. "There was no one by that name working here?" She hesitated and added, "I think you should bring Ethan in. We need to see him." Julia's stomach dropped. See him? Why? But the woman only said, please. It's important. That night, they didn't tell Ethan. They tried to keep things normal, though both parents were pale and distracted. But Ethan noticed. He always noticed. As Julia tucked him in, he whispered again, "They're trying to find me, aren't they?" She felt her throat close. "Who's trying to find you, sweetie?" He looked at her with a strange, sad smile. "You wouldn't believe me." She sat beside him. "Try me." He leaned in close, his breath warm on her ear. "The ones who made me." She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Julia found something under Ethan's bed, a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was an old Haverbrook admission form, yellowed and crinkled. It listed Ethan's name and a date of death, March 14th, 2018. 2 years before he'd ever been adopted. Her hands shook. She showed it to Thomas, who turned white. "We're calling the police," he said immediately. But when they went to Ethan's room, his bed was empty. The sheets were still warm. They searched the house, then the yard, then the street. No sign of him. Julia's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. A photo. Ethan standing by the edge of the woods behind their home, smiling faintly at the camera. Below it, the text read, "You weren't supposed to take him. They called the police, who combed the woods for hours. No trace." Then, just before sunset, one of the officers shouted. They found Ethan, sitting cross-legged beneath an oak tree, holding something in his hands. A small, broken music box. "Ethan!" Julia cried, running toward him. He looked up at her, expression calm. "It's okay, Mommy," he said softly. "I told them you didn't mean to." She fell to her knees beside him. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Who?" "The people from before." He pointed deeper into the trees. "They said I wasn't supposed to stay." The air was heavy, still. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "Ethan," Thomas said carefully, "let's go home, okay?" But Ethan only smiled sadly. "I don't think I can." And then the wind picked up. The trees swayed violently, though the air was still warm. The music box began to play on its own, an eerie, tinny lullaby. The light dimmed around them, the shadows stretching. And as Julia reached for her son, her hands went right through him. The music stopped. Ethan was gone. All that remained was the music box and a page of old paperwork, fluttering in the dirt, stamped with the words, "Return to orphanage." 2 days later, a detective called Julia. He'd checked the Haverbrook records himself. The adoption files, the emails, Mrs. Cole's name, all of it was fabricated. The building had been condemned for years. When Julia and Thomas went back to the courthouse, they begged to see the judge who'd signed the adoption. But the clerk looked at them blankly. "There's no record of an adoption hearing under your names," she said. And Judge Latham retired in 2019. They stood there, stunned, holding hands, staring at the empty hallway where they'd once thought their family began. That night, Julia dreamed of the courtroom again, except this time, it was empty. The judge's bench was draped in cobwebs. The air was cold. And from the far end of the room, a child's voice whispered, "You signed the wrong papers." When she woke up, the music box was playing softly on her nightstand. Story 4. The Baby in the Basement. The house had been empty for years. Everyone in the neighborhood said so. Still, when Mark and Leah Bennett bought the old 2-story place at the edge of town, they felt lucky. It was cheap, spacious, and carried that kind of worn, creaky charm that Leah, a photographer, adored. She loved the faded wallpaper, the narrow hallways, the smell of old pine soaked into the floors. "It just needs love," she told Mark on the day they moved in. He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Yeah," he said. "And about 50 gallons of paint." For the first few weeks, everything went smoothly. They stripped wallpaper, replaced fixtures, and opened every window to let in light. But there was one part of the house they didn't go near, the basement. The door to it was strange, heavy. It had a sliding latch and an old lock that seemed newer than everything else in the house. When they asked the realtor about it, she'd laughed awkwardly. "Oh, that," she said. "It's just an old storage cellar. Probably filled with junk." They left it alone at first, but as the days passed, Leah began to notice things. Soft creaks at night, the sound of something rolling slowly across the floor below them. Once, while Mark was at work, she heard what sounded like a baby crying. She froze in the kitchen, every hair on her neck rising. The sound was faint, muffled, coming from beneath the floorboards. When Mark came home, she told him, trying to laugh it off. "Maybe it's the pipes," he frowned. "Pipes don't sound like babies." That night, they decided to check the basement. The key they found hanging inside the cabinet didn't fit, so Mark used a crowbar. The lock snapped, and the heavy door groaned open. A cold, damp smell rolled out. The air felt stale, heavy, almost wet. They went down together, flashlights in hand. The concrete steps creaked under their weight. The basement was huge, divided into 2 rooms. The first was empty except for old paint cans and rusted tools. But the second room, the one at the far end, had a door of its own. It was painted white. And across it, in faded black letters, someone had written "Nursery." Leah's heart began to pound. "Mark, what the hell?" He hesitated, then turned the knob. Inside, the walls were still papered with cartoon clouds and faded pastel stars. A small wooden crib stood in the center of the room, covered in dust. Above it, a cracked mobile hung motionless. Leah took a shaky step closer. There were old toys on the floor, a rubber duck, a rattle, a stuffed rabbit missing an eye. Everything was perfectly arranged, as if waiting for a baby who never came back. Then she saw something under the crib, a small wooden box. Inside it were several sheets of paper. She pulled one out. They were adoption documents. The names were smudged, but she could still read them. Thomas and Carol Whitmore. Date of adoption, 1989. "Didn't the realtor say the Whitmores owned this place before?" she whispered. Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, they moved away after their kid died, or something like that. But when they checked the rest of the documents, the dates didn't add up. There were 2 adoption certificates, issued 5 years apart. The first child's name was Emily. The second was just listed as Infant M. And the signature line for the caseworker was blank. That night, neither of them slept. Every time Leah closed her eyes, she heard faint sounds again. Soft thuds from the basement, a low creak of a rocking chair. Around 3 a.m., the baby monitor they'd set up for their niece, who visited often, suddenly turned on by itself. Static. Then, a faint cooing sound. "Mark," she whispered. He sat up instantly, listening. The sound was clearer now. A baby's voice, babbling softly, coming through the monitor they'd left unplugged. He went downstairs to check the basement. The door stood open. He could have sworn he'd locked it. When he came back up, his face was pale. "There's something down there," he said. "Someone's been moving the toys." The next day, Leah called the county adoption office. "Hi," she said, trying to sound casual. "We just found some old paperwork in our home. An adoption from 1989. Can you check the records for a Thomas and Carol Whitmore?" The woman on the other end paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Those records were sealed years ago. Can you just tell me if the child's alive?" There was a long silence. Then the woman said quietly, "The Whitmores didn't adopt 1 child. They adopted 3. All of them vanished. The agency was shut down afterward." Leah felt her knees go weak. "Vanished? No trace," the woman said. "They claimed they'd been taken." But the police found nothing. When Leah hung up, she turned to find Mark staring at the baby monitor. It was on again. But this time there was a voice. Not a baby's. A small child whispering, "Come see me, Mommy." They rushed downstairs. The air was freezing. Their flashlights flickered. And there, in the center of the nursery, the crib was swaying slightly, as if recently touched. Mark lifted the wooden box again and gasped. Inside was now a new document, one they hadn't seen before. Adoption form, 2023. Under adoptive parents, it said, Mark and Leah Bennett. Under child's name, it said, Infant M. And below that, the same signature, scrawled in fading ink. They stared at it in horror. "We didn't sign this," Leah whispered. The baby monitor crackled again. "You did now," the voice said. The light bulb above them popped, plunging the room into darkness. Leah screamed. Mark turned the flashlight toward the sound and froze. In the corner of the nursery, a figure was sitting in the rocking chair. Small, childlike, rocking slowly, clutching a blanket. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, voice trembling. The figure tilted its head. Its eyes glinted faintly in the beam. "You're my new parents," it said softly. "Don't you remember?" They stumbled back toward the stairs, but the basement door slammed shut above them with a deafening crack. The lights flickered on again, every bulb in the room glowing with a sickly yellow light. The air buzzed, thick and cold. And then came the wailing. Not one cry, but three overlapping, echoing sobs of infants from different directions. The walls trembled. The crib began to rock violently. Mark tried to grab Leah, but she was staring in horror at the wall behind the crib, where faint, wet handprints were spreading outward, too small to be adult, too deliberate to be random. The rocking stopped. Silence fell. Then, faintly, from behind the wall, they both heard it. 3 soft heartbeats, and a whisper that seemed to crawl through the plaster itself. "Welcome home." When the police came the next morning, they found the basement door torn off its hinges, but the room below was empty. No toys, no crib, no paperwork. Only a single baby rattle, still gently rolling on the floor. The Bennetts were never seen again. Neighbors later claimed they sometimes heard crying coming from the boarded-up house. But when anyone went inside, it was always quiet, until they reached the basement. Then, if you listened closely enough, you could still hear the faintest lullaby echoing in the dark. Story 5. The Exchange Program. When 16-year-old Anya arrived in America, everything felt too bright, too loud, and too clean. She had spent her whole life in a small orphanage outside Warsaw, the kind of place where silence lingered in the hallways and winters felt endless. So when she was told a family in the United States wanted her out of all the others, she didn't ask questions. She just packed her things, hugged her roommate goodbye, and climbed into the van that would take her away. The agency representative who traveled with her, a man named Mr. Hale, wore a perfect black suit and carried no ID badge. He said little on the flight, except for one line he repeated whenever she tried to talk about her new family. "Remember, Anya, you were chosen. That means you must make them happy." When they landed, her family was waiting. A well-dressed couple, Margaret and David Lane, stood at the arrival's gate holding a sign that said, "Welcome home, Anya." Their smiles were wide, almost too wide. Margaret hugged her immediately, holding her too long. The drive to their suburban home was silent except for the hum of the car. The Lane's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with identical manicured lawns and white fences. From the outside, it looked perfect. From the inside, it felt staged, like a model home in a showroom, spotless, decorated, but without warmth. That night, Anya unpacked in her new bedroom. It was pink and girlish, with stuffed animals arranged neatly on the bed, though she had never told anyone her favorite color. When she looked out the window, she noticed something strange. The neighboring houses were dark, every window black. No cars, no sound, just silence. At dinner, David asked questions that didn't feel right. "Do you sleep well? Are you comfortable in small spaces? Do you ever wander at night?" Margaret smiled through every question, watching Anya's every reaction. After dinner, they asked her to sit in the living room for a welcoming tradition. David dimmed the lights, and Margaret brought out a camera. "Smile for us, Anya," she said softly. "We want to capture your first night here." The flash was blinding. When Anya blinked the spots from her eyes, she saw Margaret whispering something to David, who nodded and scribbled notes on a small notepad. That night, as she tried to sleep, Anya heard faint beeping, like a timer, coming from the air vent. The noise grew louder when she moved closer to the wall. She covered her head with the blanket and tried to ignore it. The next morning, she woke to find her bedroom door locked from the outside. At first, she thought it was a mistake. But when she knocked softly, Margaret's voice answered from the other side. "Breakfast in an hour, don't touch the curtains." When Anya looked at the curtains, she realized they weren't curtains at all. They were painted onto the wall. That was when she began to feel trapped. For the next week, every move she made was monitored. The Lanes had cameras in every corner of the house, small, barely noticeable ones, but Anya had lived in institutions long enough to recognize the faint whir of a lens turning. She wasn't allowed outside except for short walks in the backyard, surrounded by a tall white fence with spikes at the top. When she asked to call her caseworker, Margaret's expression tightened. "There's no need for that," she said gently. "Mr. Hale handles everything. You're our daughter now." But Anya had noticed something else strange. Whenever she mentioned Mr. Hale, both Margaret and David would glance toward the hallway, where a small red light blinked near the ceiling. 2 weeks later, things changed. That night, around midnight, Anya woke to the sound of voices, soft, mechanical, coming from the vent. She pressed her ear to the wall. "She's responding well," David's voice said. A pause. Then another voice, distorted, replied, "Good. Keep her compliant." The bidders are watching. Anya's stomach dropped. She pushed her desk against the wall and climbed up, unscrewing the vent grate with her fingers. Inside was a small black device, a camera with a blinking red light. She yanked it out, and the moment she did, the hallway lights outside her room flickered on. The door unlocked itself with a click. She stood frozen. Then she heard Margaret's voice downstairs, low but sharp. "She knows." Anya ran. She bolted down the hall, past the living room, and froze when she saw the front door. The locks were on the outside, bolted shut. Margaret appeared from the kitchen, holding something behind her back. Her face was calm, but her eyes were cold. "Anya, you weren't supposed to touch the equipment." David stepped into view beside her, holding a tablet. On the screen, a live video feed showed Anya standing exactly where she was, from multiple camera angles. "See?" he said quietly. "You're special." They're all watching right now. The screen flashed, revealing a live chat beside the video feed, lines of text in different languages. "Beautiful specimen. Perfect symmetry. I bid 50,000. Anya's blood ran cold. Margaret stepped closer. "It's called the exchange program, dear. It's not adoption. It's an opportunity. You should be proud. They chose you." Anya turned and ran down the hall, heart hammering. She ducked into the study and slammed the door behind her. The window was locked, but she grabbed a lamp and smashed it. Outside, the neighborhood looked wrong. The houses she'd thought were neighbors were just facades. Wooden shells with no lights, no interiors. She climbed out, cutting her hand on the glass, and ran barefoot across the dead lawns. Behind her, she heard the house alarm blare. "Anya!" Margaret's voice echoed, distorted through loudspeakers. "Don't make this harder. You're ours now." She reached the edge of the cul-de-sac and found a fence, tall, metal, stretching endlessly in both directions. The houses weren't in a neighborhood. They were inside a compound. Then she saw headlights approaching. A black van, identical to the one that had taken her from the orphanage. The side door slid open, and Mr. Hale stepped out, his suit immaculate as ever. "You shouldn't have run," he said calmly. "Your property now." She stumbled back, screaming for help, but no one answered. The air was silent except for the hum of electric fences. Hale reached into his coat and pulled out a syringe. "It's easier this way. You'll wake up somewhere new." Anya turned and bolted toward the back of the compound, darting between fake houses, her bare feet slapping against the pavement. She found another fence, this one lower. She climbed it, tearing her skin on the spikes, and dropped into the woods beyond. For hours, she ran through the trees until she reached a highway. A passing truck driver saw her waving frantically on the roadside, barefoot and bleeding. He called the police, who took her to the nearest station. When they contacted the exchange program agency, the line went dead mid-call. The office address didn't exist. The Lane's house was later found abandoned. All surveillance equipment had been stripped out. The basement floor was lined with metal crates, each labeled with a name and photo. Most were empty. Authorities later found files linking Mr. Hale to dozens of adoptions across Europe and Asia, children who had vanished after being placed with private families. The case was never officially solved. Anya was placed in protective custody. She rarely spoke, but when she did, she repeated one line over and over. They didn't adopt me. They bought me. Months later, the police reopened the investigation after finding something new. A live stream appeared briefly on a hidden server on the dark web, showing a dimly lit room, walls covered in pink wallpaper. A girl's voice whispered from the shadows, trembling, "Please, I want to go home." And from off-camera, a man's voice answered softly, "Smile for us, Anya." They're watching again.